Welcome to climate.edu, the podcast about climate change and higher education. I'm your host, Richard Sebastian. Well, welcome everyone to Season 2 of climate.edu. It has been a minute, hasn't it? Well, I'm happy to be back at this after a pretty hectic summer and early fall, and really excited to share some new episodes focused on climate change and higher education. I'm also really excited about today's guest, but before I get to that, I did want to mention that one of the things that kept me pretty busy this summer is that I enrolled in a course from Terra.do. I don't know if you've heard of that organization. It's a for-profit learning organization focused on climate change. I took a 12-week course called Learning for Action, which finished up, last month. Among many valuable things I got out of the course, which was really just focused on climate science, climate solutions, really great guest speakers, kind of very comprehensive course, and a really great network, community around the course and the organization. But I felt like that there was a realization within this course that more and more folks recognize how important education is to broadly meet our climate goals. There are a lot of educators who are in the course, but there's also a general level of interest in climate education amongst participants. There's several thousand in the course that I was in. And I kind of feel like that echoed what was happening kind of in the larger global climate action space. Yes, science is important, solutions are important, but we really need, education and learning to serve as a kind of a glue to hold everything together and kind of enable these things to happen. So, but anyway, I'm not getting paid from Terra.do. Just wanted to give a shout out to the organization and for the course. If you're interested, it's a pretty good comprehensive grounding in all things climate, to focus on climate action, right? Actually doing something. So yeah, I recommend it. It's not free, but I will say they did offer financial aid. But if you have the time to put into it, I think it's worth it. So anyway, let's move on to today's episode. So back in May, which seems like a lifetime ago, I was invited to moderate a panel at a 2-day conference at Duke University, and the conference was focused broadly on climate change and higher education. It was called All In: Higher Education, Interdisciplinarity, and Our Collective Climate Challenge. Conference brought together faculty and administrators from 2- and 4-year institutions, really across the U.S. It was very North Carolina heavy, since it was at Duke and Durham, but really there were representation from all over the country, and we it was 2 days, and we engaged in really deep conversations about different ways that higher ed could address climate change. So there were work groups who wrestled with topics like, how do you integrate climate education with racial and social equity? How do you use campuses as testbeds for experiential and applied learning? How do you develop, turnkey resources to integrate climate into curricula and programs? And the work group that I was in was focused on training the green workforce, right? So it was really an encouraging conference. I was, maybe it hearkened the change that I think is happening more broadly. So the Duke All-In Conference is also where I met today's guest, Dr. Toddy Steelman. Dr. Steelman is Vice President and Vice Provost for Climate and Sustainability at Duke University. She's the person who was behind the All-In Conference, and she's also the driving force behind Duke's ambitious climate commitment. During today's episode, Dr. Steelman and I talk about this climate commitment, which in my mind is one of the most comprehensive and ambitious commitments to addressing climate change I've seen come out of higher ed. We talk about how she and the other leadership found the political capital to make this commitment on behalf of Duke University. and how their commitment and their work in this area could be a model for other institutions of higher education, both in the US and across the globe. So, really excited to bring this to you today. So, without further ado, here is Dr. Toddy Steelman. Dr. Toddy Steelman, thank you for being on climate.edu.
Thank you so much, Richard, for the invitation. Please call me Toddy.
Okay, great. All right, Toddy. I want to start out first by talking a little bit about your role at Duke University. Remind me of your title again.
Vice President and Vice Provost for Climate and Sustainability. And so it's a brand new position for our university.
Okay.
Signifying the commitment that we have made to climate change and sustainability. And it's vice president because I have oversight of all of our operations, including our health system and our remote campuses in China and Singapore, as well as athletics. And provost, vice provost, because I also have oversight of our educational mission, research, and other aspects, all of which we are trying to focus on here at Duke University as we turn our attention to climate change.
Right, and certainly we'll get into the Duke climate commitment. But you're also an alum of Duke.
I am. Yes, I am. I graduated from Duke many years ago now, and I came back in 2018, very fortunately, to become the dean of the Nicholas School of the Environment.
Okay.
And so that was the school where I graduated with my PhD. So it was super fun to come back as an alum and lead that school for 5 years. And then last year transitioned basically into this new role as the president asked me to.
Yeah, so let's talk about this new role and the Duke climate commitment. I met you at the All-In conference back in May, and it's certainly something I want to talk about. But I learned a lot more about Duke's climate commitment, and I saw then that this event that I was at, which I was really kind of grateful to be at, was connected to that mission more. So I think it's really kind of impressive and exciting. And so perhaps you can tell us a little bit about, or a lot even, about the Duke climate commitment and kind of describe what it is and kind of what you guys have taken on at Duke around climate.
Absolutely. And thanks for the question, the opportunity to talk a little bit about it. So the Duke climate commitment, we launched it in September 2022. And it's really, a comprehensive approach to addressing the climate challenge. And we want to take a university-wide effort, basically, to create a more resilient, a more thriving, a more flourishing, carbon neutral world by focusing our entire mission on climate change. So that means our educational mission, our research mission, our operations mission, our community partnerships, our external engagement, everything. So when you've got a university and you have that, those are the 5 pillars of your mission, we're forcing that through the lens of climate and sustainability. So it's really quite exciting. And I could talk extensively about what we're doing in each of those areas: education, research, operations, partnerships, and engagement. But it's probably going to get a little lengthy. I think the big point is that we feel very passionately that higher education needs to be doing its part when we think about the climate challenge in front of us. And this is a way for us to plant a really big flag in the ground to say, we know that we will not make the difference when it comes to climate change, but we are fully committed to making a difference.
So, I think this is such a, for me, I mean, I'm somewhat of a critic of higher ed. You think of higher ed, more as a sector and the response to climate change, which I think has been pretty anemic. We haven't seen a lot of leadership. And I know there's lots of factors involved with just the state of higher ed, and there's all sorts of different kinds of institutions and politics involved and finances. But how did you get this done? Like,
how did this happen?
Like, even with some of the sausage making would be interesting. But how did this? You were at the Nicholson School, right? And was Was this something that was being pushed for amongst the faculty and students? Did it come from the president? How did the idea get seeded, and then how did you get to the point where you actually
Absolutely. I mean, I think we have been enormously fortunate to have our president 100% on board with this idea, as well as our board of trustees. That's the big governing board for Duke University. Today in higher education, there is a lot of drama on boards, between boards and presidents and their universities, and we're not seeing a lot of that. And everybody is in agreement that this is something that the university has to do. So first and foremost, I would say we have a really strong authority signal from the very top all the way down. And when you have that, that is something, Richard. I mean, because everybody across campus hears that and they start taking all of their own action. So, I mean, I think there was grassroots interest in us doing something because we have a lot of assets at Duke. We have the Nicholas School, which has been around for more than 30 years, which I had the privilege of leading. We have the Nicholas Institute, which is a policy think tank on campus that sort of helps us interface in the policy world. We have Sustainable Duke, which has been around for 18 years, right? We will be carbon neutral this year. Because we've been doing this work. We have a marine lab, we have a forest, we have Duke in DC, we have our campus in China, Duke Kunshan University. So we have enormous assets that we recognize that we could harness together because we've been doing some of this work for quite a long time. The question then is, who is going to get up every day, gather all of those amazing resources together and really, continue to push. And so that's, we started in 2022. President Price appointed me in summer of 2023, basically to do this. And so I've been doing this job for a little bit under a year now.
But, there has to be, I guess, from the president and the board, and I assume you too, certainly there's a moral angle to this, right? And this is the right thing to do, but there's a business case to be made too. Is that part of this as well? You must think it makes sense to do this for students and
absolutely. No, absolutely. Because, you have to think about, we would like to see every major be a climate major, right? And I think that was part of the impetus behind the all-in, workshop, symposium, gathering that we had,
right.
Of which you took part. Because if you think about the climate change is going, I defy you to find a profession that will not be touched by climate change. Everything is going to be affected by it. And it's been, pleasantly enlightening for me to learn how this is taking place across our university. For instance, I had a conversation with some of our nursing staff a couple of weeks ago. And, one of the things they brought up was just how medications, if left in a car or in a heated environment, will be altered in their efficacy.
Right.
So it's not something you think about, but heat and climate will affect everything. I also had the privilege of participating in a workshop 3 weeks ago called Pastoral Care for Climate Change down at our Marine Lab in Beaufort, North Carolina, where we had 40 plus faith leaders from all over the state and beyond talking about how do you preach in the face of the unthinkable and the incredible roles that churches in our society play as sanctuaries from all sorts of mental illness to actually providing shelter in storms.
Like cooling centers.
Yes, of course. And so just so you don't necessarily think about preachers, you don't necessarily think about nurses, but just those two events in the last month have been really resonant with me in terms of the salience of why we as an educational institution have an obligation to society at large to be infusing climate and sustainability content in what we are doing. I also think it's really important because if higher education wants to have impact at scale, then this is a way for us to do it. We graduate, generations of students every year that go out into the world, and they are very purpose driven and want to be those change agents, those climate, change makers.
Right. What has been the response from students, both current students and students who are maybe looking around.
Yeah.
You get some of the best students in the world across the globe. Is this an attractive project for them when they're deciding? Do they tell you that?
Yeah. Certainly for some. I
Yeah.
mean, some of them are skeptical. I think, when you said, you're a little skeptical of higher education. So I think some of them are a little bit cynical about whether or not we're really serious about this, to which I always say, absolutely we are. And, pay attention to our deeds, not our words. And just watch and see what we're going to do and find a way for you to get involved, right? Like, be part of this, like join us in what we're doing. But what I'll tell you is that we are seeing in the applications that we get at Duke, this is something, the Duke Climate Commitment increasingly is something that we see students mention in their applications. I want to come to Duke because of the commitment to climate, and I want to be part of that. I think that's really energizing. I did an orientation last year, and I had several students come up to me and say, this is why I wanted to come to Duke. And that's been, that's very heartening in many different ways. Once we have our students here, they become part of our community. And man, they push us in ways, sometimes ways we are not ready to be pushed yet. So they become part of a very thriving, dynamic community that wants to see us do more. And so that is also very exciting, I think. Our faculty as well, similarly, in terms of what we can do. So, I think we're attracting students, and I would love to see Duke become a destination site. Just like Stanford is known for tech and Hopkins is known for, health. It would be great. I would like to see Duke known for climate and sustainability. Like, this is the reason you want to come here, is because it will be infused in everything that we do. And I think that's a really exciting proposition for us. So, I think there's always room for us to grow and improve, and where we are headed with all this, it's still very early days.
Yeah.
But it is super exciting to be in partnership, I think, with the students who want to come and help us build this out.
So, I do want to talk about kind of the larger kind of higher ed landscape, but can you give, not only is the commitment impressive, just articulating it, I think is kind of gratifying, but you're actually weaving in, at the conference, the All-In conference, which we mentioned and that we'll talk about, you talk about interdisciplinarity, right? And how these things are connected. And if you're in the climate movement, that's true generally.
For sure.
It's everything. Can you give a couple examples of maybe some things that you're working on or prioritizing, certainly around how are you weaving climate into, English literature, or, how are you connecting these, curriculum programs, which seems like a big challenge, just knowing those domains and the protectiveness that often we see there. Yeah,
absolutely. So our goal at Duke is to weave climate and sustainability into every school. So we have 10 schools or colleges, and the way you would want to infuse climate and sustainability content is different depending on which school you're in. So this is why we've opted not to have one required course that we want everybody to take. Because if you are trying to be a doctor, the way you need to learn about climate and sustainability is very different than if you're in the divinity school, or if you're in engineering, or if you're in law. Not only do you have very constrained curricula in places like engineering and law, like there are very few places to put more electives in because of how constrained those curricula are. So we have to be really bespoke, boutique about how we approach this. And the best way we're going to do that is by turning it over to the faculty, because the faculty will know best how to do this. We've been very fortunate to have the support of the deans. The deans are all in on this as well. You can't do it if you don't have that level of leadership involved. And so, it's unleashing the creativity in each of the schools for how best this maps onto their curriculum and where they want to do it. So in some cases, they have courses, it's a course on climate and law, or it's a course on climate and medicine.
Okay.
In other cases, you've got modules that they're taking, that they're infusing in existing courses, where you don't have a lot of room to add a singular course that they want people to take. And so it's a mix and match strategy that we're seeing, in addition to a variety of co-curricular, extracurricular activities that students can participate in. So we've got certificate programs that we're launching that you can layer on to what your degree is already. And then we've got a variety of other programs that you can participate in, summer programs, January break programs, weekend programs, a variety of other ways. So I often describe it as we're probably going to have three levels of participation, and ultimately want an immersive experience where you can't avoid climate and sustainability programming on our campus. But that immersion will happen in three different levels. For some students, it'll just be dipping their toe in the water, and that may be just taking a course or having a module. For others, it'll mean jumping in the water and going for a swim. So they might end up doing a minor or a certificate program. And then for others, they're going to strap on the scuba gear and like go for the deep dive. And those are the students who will actually major in something that is climate and sustainability centerline focused, or come out with a full on degree.
And this is in gen ed courses as well.
Well, that's the goal, right? I mean, we've just revised our entire curriculum at Duke University.
Okay.
And there's a call out for what we're calling constellation courses, where you can craft constellations of classes. And so climate and sustainability is one of those areas of constellation.
Okay.
And so it's going to be put in that way, not necessarily as a requirement of our new curriculum, but we want it to be a little bit more organically formed.
Okay. So this seems to me, and I think to many people, pretty impressive, but also kind of common sense. Like we need to, higher education needs to be geared towards what's happening. And, this is, an existential challenge where we need, at all levels, including our higher ed research institutions and students. And why do you think this is not happening? Why do you think Duke is fairly unique in this kind of commitment? I mean, obviously you had, the lay of the land was such that you were able to, you had a board that supported and a president was pushing this. Those things are pretty crucial, but, it seems like there would be more of this, or at least, and maybe there is talk about it, but why do you think it's not happening as much as maybe it should be?
So we're a private university. So I think that gives us some degree of protection as a private institution, not a public institution. And I think climate can still be a polarizing topic in some places.
Yeah.
So I think we've got that luxury. I think that we also have resources. We are a well-resourced institution, so we are able to do things, I think, that you can't do in other places. But I don't want resources to be the main thing that is a takeaway here, because actually over the last year, I have learned about so much innovation happening in so many places. And even though they might not be calling it climate commitment or might not be able to be public about it, there is so much work actually going on, Richard. And I think that has been one of the most exciting things that I've learned about over this last year. I've been part of an Aspen Institute working group that has brought together an entire group sort of specifying what's the game plan for higher education.
Oh yeah. This is Planet Ed, is that?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And so, this is Planet Ed started as K through 12, and they did the K through 12 work. And then this year has been all about doing the higher ed work. And so I've been part of that planning team doing the higher ed work. And it has just been super inspiring to hear all the stories and things that are happening in many other places. So stuff that is happening in California is fully ingrained into many of the system approaches. And, I think what's going to be, you've got 2-year institutions that are doing incredible work.
Sure, yeah.
You've heard from tribal colleges and HBCUs and, 4-year institutions, R1 institutions, like everybody has something going on. And I think that's really, really exciting. So I think there are reasons that some people might not want to be as vocal about it as we are. So there might be more work going on there than we think. I think there's always room for improvement in terms of other places. And this was part of what we wanted to do as the All-In Symposium is how do we create a large community of practice of people that want to be doing this work and creating those clusters of where we can actually make some progress, where we all get smarter faster. And if you're working in an institution or a state that is not as supportive as you would like it to be, then we'll create greater resilience in our community by creating this network, right? So how do we do that?
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. Thank you to the All In conference, which was back in May. What was the where did this idea come from? In
Yeah.
bringing other colleges, who was invited, and what was the rationale behind this event?
Yeah. It wasn't our idea. Katie Douglas, who was our main planner for this, she and I attended a symposium at MIT in spring 2023. And we came out of that. I mean, it was terrific. It was just so great. Our colleagues at MIT did a bang up job of that, sort of bringing folks together. And we walked away from that being completely inspired about and energized because we got together with that community, right? And so that just really stuck with me. And I felt like, well, we've got some resources. I would like to pick up the ball where our colleagues at MIT left it and carry it forward, because I think, I like to say that we're engaged in a marathon that is also a relay race. So we all have to pick up pieces and continue to moving it down the field. So we contacted our friends at MIT, talked to them. They said they would love to help us continue planning, especially because they could see their idea continue forward. And so we were fortunate for them to have buy-in. And so that was really the impetus. It was from MIT. And so when we got together and started thinking about it, it's like, okay, what would be the right next iteration of this conference in terms of what we wanted to do? We wanted to focus on interdisciplinary approaches because we know that you cannot solve or address climate or sustainability problems if you don't have multiple disciplines at the table. And also the idea that we need it to have in every class. So how do you actually do that in every class? Multiple disciplines have to be represented. And then we also wanted it to be, a working meeting that would sort of create not just community, but also advance some communities of practice around key areas that we heard people wanted to have more input and collaboration around. So, building a network. We wanted to make sure we built a network. We wanted to make sure that people would leave with the opportunity to take something back to their home institution, right, and then create this community of practice around specific areas moving forward.
And you said those, so there was, several themes, kind of areas to the event, and those were they were generated from the MIT or just from colleagues, or things that you felt were what folks were wanting to get out of the conference?
So the 5 themes that we came up with came from the steering committee that we assembled. And so those were engaging with community to teach climate and sustainability, lowering the barrier to entry, sort of what are the turnkey resources for non-experts to teach something in climate and sustainability, teaching climate and sustainability where we work on campus, intersectional education, teaching climate, sustainability, racial equity, and social justice. And then the last theme was training a green economy workforce. So those were the 5 areas that the steering committee, so we had a steering committee of climate and sustainability faculty, experts, leaders from across North Carolina and beyond that really helped us hone in on those areas, sort of just distilling them down. And so before the symposium, we sent out a survey and asked people, where would they like to work if they wanted to work in a working group? And we got, really interesting buy-in across all 5 areas. So they turned out to be the right 5.
So, I think approaching an event like this, it wasn't super big. How many attendees?
85.
85, yeah.
85, 90 probably is where we ended up.
Okay. But having a working meeting has its own challenges, right? You're like, hey,
yes,
go in. But then you're continuing that work. And so, I was part of the Green Workforce group. And so we, as part of the conference, came up with kind of a project, call it that. And the expectation is there will be some engagement with that over the coming year. Yeah. What is your hope for that? What is your hope for that? And how are you supporting that work as it moves forward over the year?
Absolutely. So I think we've done a couple of things. One is we had kind of a social contract as we all left the symposium to say that we would continue to get together, right?
Yep.
And so I think we're trying to hold each other accountable in these working groups. And we are going to establish sort of bringing everybody back together again in a Zoom meeting. And then the working groups will meet at 3 specified times of the year. So Katie Douglas, who I'm very fortunate to have as our associate director for programs and administration, has taken the lead on scheduling all that and organizing. So that's the first thing. Like you have to have somebody who's willing to do the organizing and send out the calendar invite and make sure it all happens, right? Then second, we've got, folders and workspace. I can't remember if we're on Google Docs or Box or whatever it is, but we're in some sort of space that's open access for everybody. And we've put together, short 2-pagers of the resources that are available that have been crowdsourced. So I think one, there's something that everybody can draw on. And then second, there's a working agenda that was sketched out while we were still in the symposium to say, we're going to do these things. And so, for instance, you said you were part of the green economy workforce group.
Yep.
So, the goal there is to share stories among each other over this next year for multimodal media formats to build what I understood to be a library of examples that we can tell others about what are the jobs, how do people get jobs, what are those jobs, what do those jobs look like in this new economy, and then maybe do a future, I think a future trends forum about where these jobs are going. So I think those are the 2 action items that came out of that.
That's right.
And so now, now you've got 3, if people still are energized to work on that, we now have some workspace in terms of time and workspace in terms of virtual space to put those ideas. So, it's the basic social infrastructure that you need to maintain some degree of momentum.
Is there an idea to do another round of this next year?
I don't know.
I mean, you got 2 under your belt now, right? MIT and Duke. I don't know if it's going to pick an outright.
Yeah,
conference.
I don't know. I think part of it depends on the progress that is made over this next year with these working groups. Like, does it merit us getting back together again?
Yeah.
I am not sure. And so, then I think also the question is there somebody else out there that might want to pick this up and carry it forward? Because I think we're stronger when you've got different places sort of committing to these ideas and carrying them forward. So maybe I, would love to continue to be involved in this work. But I think I would want to see what's the value add of getting everybody back together again, because that's part of the proposition of this meeting was, I don't want us just to meet. We've got too many of those things. We have to actually meet and see if there's a way for us to drive the work forward, right?
Yeah.
So let's not just talk, let's do, and let's see if that actually happens.
Yeah. So what is your, I guess, what do you see, I don't know, 5-10 years from now, both with Duke, so what you want to accomplish with the climate commitment, and where you see things in the direction, what would you like to see? I mean, you want Duke to become the climate college, right? Center.
Absolutely.
But any other thoughts about how you see that, what you see that looks like, and also, if you can say, or if you want to say, broadly higher ed. What does that look like? Given the challenges and given the current, the status of higher ed.
Absolutely. So on the education, so I'll talk about Duke first. On the education front, we could say 5 years, but if we say 6 years, that takes us to 2030, which is a really important year when we think about the climate challenge, right? Because by 2030, we have to have reduced our emissions by 45% if we're going to stay within the 1.5 degree envelope. So I really like to be thinking about what can we achieve by 2030. That's a deadline I've given myself. So we want to educate a climate and sustainability fluent student body. And so by that time, every student graduating from Duke should be fluent in some degree, right? We're working on something that we call the fluency framework right now that will sort of allow us to evaluate what we mean by that. And by then, climate and sustainability content will be infused across our entire curriculum. And, we'll see more programs that specialize in climate, like our climate and sustainability engineering concentration, or the climate program that we have a whole variety of different programs like that. On the research front, we have identified 4 key areas: transforming energy, climate resilient communities, environmental and climate justice, and data-driven climate solutions. So those are 4 big areas. And so we're supporting interdisciplinary research and collaborative projects across those areas. And I would like us to be a destination point for faculty and students who want, who see us building communities in the, scholarly intellectual communities in these areas and want to come and be part of being in that intellectual community. And out of that, we are driving incredibly innovative ideas, both through basic and applied sciences, that are having real world impacts. On the operations front, we will achieve carbon neutrality in 2024. But
this year.
That's this year, yes. And that was work we started in 2007. So we will achieve that on our campus, but now we need to expand our footprint. We didn't include our health system originally or our international campuses because they didn't exist.
Okay. Yeah.
So now we need to widen our aperture, expand the umbrella, and we're going to do it all over again. We've made probably upwards of $400 million worth of investments to achieve carbon neutrality on our campus. That also includes carbon offsets. So I don't want to leave the impression that we haven't done it without offsets, because offsets will always be important, because you have a certain irreducibility of carbon, given your campus activities. So carbon offsets are an important part of that. But we're going to redo that. But I also want Duke to be a campus where the moment you step on the campus, you can see, taste, feel, hear that we are doing something different. We've got a lot of work to do on this front, on the waste front, on our food systems front, on our transportation front. So this is a challenge. By 2030, we will have a circular waste system on our campus, fully functioning. We will have inculcated an entire culture that is more driven by this idea of circular economy. And we want every student, faculty, staff member sort of participating in it, thinking about what does it mean to be a post-consumerist society. We want to have a transportation system that is much more user-friendly for a variety of modalities. And we want to have a food system that is integrated into our local agricultural economy, where we are a full participant and purchasing from the local economy, supporting a robust food ecosystem around us, and having more healthful foods because of that. So, and again, the food system has to be integrated into our waste system, because we're going to have a fully composting system as part of our circular economy, which means integrating into Durham and Durham County's waste systems as well, building out an entire system. Wow. So, that's what I have in mind for our operations.
Before you talk about, is with some of that work or some of the challenges of like the circular kind of economy and the work that you're doing on campus, are there are students involved as far as learning activities and some of those things? You have any examples of how students are kind of helping accomplish?
Absolutely. Like a really great example, I'll use athletics. Athletics is a really big part of Duke's culture. You may have heard we have a basketball team.
My son has heard. He's in.
So, how do we make our athletic events waste-free? Because that's a really amazing opportunity to reach a segment of the population that normally we don't interface with, because so many different people from all sorts of walks of life attend our, basketball, football, softball, you name it, events. So how do we create waste-free environments? So we have a cadre of student athletes who are really passionate about this work, that want to help us drive that work. So we have interns who come from the athletics world, basically student athletes who are helping because they know how to get some of this work done. They're on the inside, right? They understand not only the student mentality, but the athlete mentality, and then working with our entire athletics team, our athletics director, Nina King, and her whole group on how do we create waste-free events here at Duke.
Wow, that's great. Okay, so you talked about operations.
Operations.
Is there
And
another?
then community partnerships is another pillar in what we're doing, community partnerships. We want to engage with our local to global communities to identify equitable climate solutions and be a responsible, authentic partner in the process of doing that. And so we are working with the public sector, working the private sector, nonprofit sector to promote regional sustainability options. Durham and the Triangle region is a very vibrant and growing climate tech hub. And we want to be part of that. Sort of how do we infuse the work that they are doing into our classrooms, and how do our classrooms feed into that innovation ecosystem? And then we also just want to be a good partner to Durham and the city and the county in terms of where we are, and be part of that. So food security is one area we have a very robust partnership that we're developing with Durham and Durham County.
Great. Not a lot of work for you to do there.
Well, there's also external partnerships. I didn't mention that. I have to say that for external engagement, right? So we want to have impact with policymakers, industry leaders, global networks as a convener of note, a convener of record. Like, how do we pull together what I would call, folks from different backgrounds? Like, how do we make sure we're working across the aisle with both Democrats and Republicans on key issues where we have commonly understood progress that we can make together? So that's a real advantage, I think, of being in a place like North Carolina, which is a purple state.
Yep.
And we are interested in seeing our state thrive and being a convener of note here. We also have our offices in Duke and DC. We do interesting convenings up there as well. I did one earlier in the semester on extreme weather in North Carolina, where we pulled in members of our North Carolina congressional delegation, as well as experts from, across, policymakers and beyond. It's like, what can we all be doing to prepare for extreme weather? And everybody has an interest in doing that.
Yeah. So any opinion broadly about higher ed, let's say 2030?
Yes. Thank you for reminding me.
What is your
that. Yeah.
maybe fear, or what are your hope?
So I think everybody can do something, right? And so I think the question is, what is that thing that you want to lean into and do? I would love to see every university have some sort of leadership position that allows them to focus on climate and sustainability, similar to what I have the privilege of doing. I have colleagues at Harvard, at NYU, at MIT, at Yale. Berkeley is hiring a position like this. Michigan is hiring a position like this. Columbia is finding a position like this. Georgetown is hiring a position like this. So we're starting to see it spread, which I think is really energizing. So I think that's very exciting news. So I think by, letting people know that we've got this position and, telling people about how we're doing it, it's getting picked up and moved into other places, which I think is very exciting. So, you can see it starting to grow, and I think that's very exciting, but every place can do something. And I think that's just it. Just what is the thing that you can start doing now that gives you a sense of agency, a sense of hope that you can make a difference in this, however small, however big, so that we all have a sense that we're pulling together as a sector.
Yeah. You talked before that, it's not all about resources. My background is community colleges. Do you work with your local community college, and what do you see as in that work, maybe a good partnership model, or tell us a little bit about that relationship.
Absolutely. And we are very interested in continuing to develop that work. So, at the All-In Symposium, right, we had Durham Tech, we had Wake Tech, we had several other representatives from other smaller colleges, liberal arts institutions from around the state, right? Because that's why it's called All In, right? We all have to be doing the work. So it's a matter of finding the right areas of intersection. So for instance, with Durham Tech, who's very close to us, at least right now, they are interested in, sustainable operations, and they are actually building new buildings, and we are getting together with them, with our sustainability staff, to share the lessons we've learned and to learn more about what they are doing. So, that's a meeting that's taking place over the summer. I think there are many other opportunities for us to be in collaboration, and part of it is just trying to figure out where the authentic areas of integration and work are. You can't force it. We're all too busy just to try to force it.
Yeah.
So then the question is, where is the area of sort of authentic engagement? And like this is one of them where like they're building something in terms of, and they want to figure out how to do it with sustainable design. That's not something where they really have expertise. I'm really keen for us to learn more about what's happening at Durham Tech. So let's go and do that, right? And start to form that partnership, because once that's there, once that nucleus is there, it will start to grow.
Is there any talk of, so, you know, you've got this kind of integrating climate into your courses and programs. Is there, you know, I assume you have a significant percentage of Durham Tech, or maybe not significant, but some transfers into Duke. Is there a large?
That has
number?
not been something that has been a robust pipeline for us for a whole variety of reasons. I believe I think that we have folks here at Duke that are looking at that. That's a little bit beyond my purview in terms of what I'm doing. But, I think that there are folks that are working on that. That's just not something that I've been.
Okay. All right. So what is your, as a professional in this field as well, are your, when you go to your sustainability conferences and meet with your colleagues, what is the, are your colleagues saying, how do we do this? How can we get our college or university to do this? And what do you tell them?
Well, I think it depends on where you've got the nucleus of energy to try to get something started. And the question is, where is that located? And does it rest with the faculty? Does it rest with the staff? Does it rest with the dean? Does it rest, at another level? Where is the energy coming from? Because you have to, if your president is not on board, there's still ways to get things done. Yeah. Lots of ways, colleges usually have a lot of discretion in terms of how they can get things done. Students have a lot of power in terms of how they can get things done. So I think it really starts with where you've got interest and capitalizing on that, generating some interest in it. So there are ways to get courses off the ground. And if a course is too heavy of a list, there's a way to get co-curricular activities off the ground. There are ways to get certificates started if, a full curriculum is something that is just not going to happen. There are ways for students to be doing work on their own campuses, typically, in terms of, we were talking before about transportation, around food, around energy, around waste. So there are many ways for students to get involved, whether it's research, whether it's education, whether it's something that's happening on the campus. And what they then need is a faculty member who's going to support them. And then if a faculty member can create some interest that way, can they get support from their college or their unit around this? So I think universities are usually pretty good about having small pots of money available for a variety of elective activities. And then it's just a matter of finding those pots of money and helping resource the activities and growing those efforts.
Do you see, you've talked about an important piece of this, which is you have a president who's supportive. You have administrative leadership that really is crucial to making it happen. Is there I know you work with Aspen. Is there a way or to get more presidents engaged in this issue?
Well, I think Second Nature has been, is one entity that has really tried to enlist, presidents at that level, basically to get them on board with climate sustainability efforts. So I think that is a nonprofit organization that has done a good job of bringing attention to that. ASHE is another, the Association for
Sustainability
Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. ASHE has been another place where I think there's been a lot of effort, right? So they have a presidential pledge that you can sign on to, as does Second Nature. So I think there's some cachet for university presidents to have signed on to these. And if they've become signatories, then that's another way for faculty and others to hold them accountable. Like, well, we signed this. Does it really mean something? What are we going to do around it? And so I think through these organizations, I think there are ways to raise the issues up. and demonstrate the enlightened self-interest of being involved in this work. You asked me before, what's the business case? Like, I think all of our students are going to need to know this. I think it's going to make them more competitive in the marketplace ultimately in terms of knowing this kind of work. It's a nice add-on if it's something that's not your primary area in terms of what you do. And I think that through more collaborative work where we generate, like, again, how do we all get smarter faster? The All-In Symposium was a way of bringing together these different communities so that we can learn how this work is done in different places. So sharing those lessons, allowing them to be taken back to your home institutions and sort of growing, I think the movement largely in higher education is something that we can all be working on. But the other thing I'll say, Richard, is that I have been astounded over this last year at the number of places. Like, I really tried to pay attention to the places where conversations about climate change in higher education were taking place. And initially, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to these 3 conferences because that's what's going to happen. But they just proliferated over this year. And so I find that to be a very encouraging sign because clearly there's enough interest out there to have multiple conferences to attract different people, either in regions or nationally or internationally. In this work. So I'm very encouraged by that. That is a really great sign that things are blowing up and taking off.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that because sometimes it's, and I know, this podcast was one way that I, find out about some of the great work that's happening on campuses and the role higher ed is taken. But again, there is that systemic issue, which you is a much more challenging.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you for your time. I imagine you don't have much of it, given what's on your plate, and but really, I have a lot of gratitude for you agreeing to be on the podcast, and thank you for your great work, and appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much for all you're doing to raise the flag, and I really appreciate the work you're doing, and thank you for coming to our symposium and learning a little bit more about not just what we're doing, but all the great work that's happening in many other places too. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Climate.edu is written by me, Richard Sebastian. The theme music is by Serge Quadrado. You'll find a link to Serge's free music archive page in the show notes, where you can also find a guest bio, transcripts, and additional links and resources. You can also go to the show website at climate.edu.com. Yes, that's right. The word climate, DOTEDU.com, where you'll find other episodes of climate.edu, get news and updates related to climate change in higher ed, or to get in touch with me. If you like this episode, make my day by subscribing. Thanks for listening. See you next time.